So I've now attached the first part of my border. So this is the seam that I just sewed in the last part, and I've just folded it over and ironed it over exactly the same as I would have done with my squares, and that gives me a really crisp straight edge across that top line. So now I take my next part of my border and I'm going to lay that here just to make sure that I know I've got it exactly right. I want it to overhang here because it's going to go over this piece, but it's going to go under this green piece at the bottom. So all I need to make sure is that this piece of fabric is long enough to cover this distance, the top distance here, and then the top of the quilt. And then fold it over and do exactly the same as I did before. So I'm going to take my corner, pop a pin in there, and then I'm going to just put a pin every so often, probably where the fabric joins each other is normally a really good place to place a pin, because it just makes sure that the fabric is really secure. So one of the things I just wanted to show you with this piece before I put all the rest of the border on is you'll see here that that piece of fabric here is overlapping, and the reason for that is because this square, the square here that I've cut, is slightly bigger than all of the rest that I've cut. So one of the other beauties of having a border, I mentioned earlier about being able to sort of cover mistakes, is this is one of the places where it will cover that mistake. It will make a straight line where before it was a slightly bumpy, rigid line where all of my squares didn't quite match. So when I sew along here and I iron along here and I show you, you'll be able to see that it straightens off that edge where before, previously, it wasn't quite straight with each other. So I take my thread and start with my double stitch, exactly the same as before. And then I just stitch all the way along this line as you saw before. And you'll see that it just makes everything along this line really straight, even though my squares weren't quite straight before. So just pulling along on that fabric. So I'm just making sure all the way along that the running stitch is as close to that line as possible. Again, it won't make huge amounts of difference because once I start to iron it, it will straighten out all of those edges on my fabric that were causing me problems before. Take it right to the edge, and always remembering that the next piece of fabric is going to go over the one that I had before. So now I've finished this corner, you'll see that that pink fabric that I've added has straightened off that edge that before was slightly bumpy. And I've also gone over with my fabric here on this corner, and my next piece will go over the pink piece. So I'm going to add the next two sections and then I'll come back to show you how to do the last corner. So if I turn this over, make sure that that's right at the end. Making sure that that's right on the end there. Hopefully there'll be enough storage on my camera to be able to record all of this, because it does take a minute. And then I add my side here. I'm just sewing along this line. It'll be so kind of crisp and straight when you finish, so it'll make all of this bit of stitching here really worthwhile along the edges. So we're going to keep going all along this line, because I haven't decided to take them the sides off there quite yet. So this is where that edge is, and I'll bring this in the middle so you can see it slightly better than before. And snip that off. Take it to the ironing board as always, and then you iron over the edge. And I know that this last piece is going to go over this edge, so just going to bring this across here, so that goes over there, so it's going to go over here as well. So I'm gonna do it at that end. Oh yeah, I'm just going to chop that salvages edge of that fabric, which I haven't quite seen. So I'm just going to add this to here. So we're stitching right across this line, exactly like we have done for every other kind of stitching. It's really always just about thinking, what will you see on the top of your quilt rather than what you will see underneath it. And if you can keep that idea in your head all the time, then it won't take as long as you think to decide on which pieces will go where. It will sort of become very apparent very quickly. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I have sewn my final piece right up, so over this bottom green piece of fabric, and I've sewn straight up until the point where the pink fabric starts. The reason for that is because on this last fold, what I need to do, and you'll be very good at this if you've ever had to use any sort of packing boxes, I have to fold over this green fabric first and probably give that a really quick iron. Then take this pink fabric over the green fabric, pull it back, and then stitch along this line that I left earlier, which will then give me that layered look on the corner that you're looking for. So if I iron this green fabric first, so I've ironed my green fabric, and so I've ironed it back so it's away from the fabric top. I take my pink piece of fabric, I lay it over the piece, the green piece, in the way that I'd like to see it, because this will go over. I then pull it back so that I expose that line that we drew on the wrong side of the fabric earlier. I'm going to take a pin it in that corner. Take my thread, of which I have a tiny amount left, and stitch as normal. So double stitch, right up to where your other stitches start. And I'm just going to stitch up to there. I take my pins out, chop off my bit there, and give it a quick iron. So there we go. Once I've ironed that final piece back up into its original position, I can then chop off any excess fabric. So any of these extra bits that are hanging off here, I can then chop off to make this my sort of edge square line. And once you've done that, you've added your border and you're ready for your quilting, for your batting, for your backing, and for your binding.